there a point, and I think that fake Jamaican and all this other stuff, isn't there a point where it's almost like you went too far, you can't bring the guy back, and you really can't make him a viable main eventer?
Well, again, the fans become the ultimate decider of that, right? So, if I read the articles online and seen the things, and what I've seen of Kofi, he's impressed me for some time. That that bounced him around in these underneath, immeasurable type of positions, and yet he seems to always pull through. And that, to me, is an indicator of a star. When you have somebody that can do that, regardless of where they are on the card or what their position is, or not the semi-main, they're not the main, but somehow they're able to get the fans talking, much like Daniel Bryan did a few years ago. That's a guy that clearly has something. But my question would be, like, again, it's like, what comes first, the chicken or the cart, the chicken or the horse, right? So, I mean, the chicken or the egg. So before I get my phrases right there. So what comes first? Was Kofi Kingston, was he a star before they started doing this, or has he only become a star recently, the chicken or the egg scenario? So my guess is that if he was able to do this over the long run, especially not in a position to draw, where they're putting on these multiple different angles and different characters and up and down the card, and yet somehow after all that, he's impressed to the point where the fans are clamoring, apparently, for him to be in a role, a prominent role. Then all the more kudos to him, because that means he's bucking the trend of the company, right? The company has other ideas to keep him in a certain place, and yet the audience is now taking over, and much like they did for Daniel Bryan, demanding more for Kofi. So kudos to him for that. That is like, from a performer's point of view, that is where it's difficult, where you realize that you're not figured in, and you're not in a prominent role, but you go out there and wrestle your ass off to the best of your ability because because the opportunity may come tomorrow, because that's just the kind of athlete you are. Fill in the blank of the because. I'm sure there's a million different answers to that. But that Kofi Kingston has been able to draw the attention of the fans that long after having been in a non-prominent role. Up and down the card. So that tells you this kid's got star quality. Because that bleeds through every time. It doesn't matter if you're in a shitty angle, a great angle, the preliminary angle, the main event angle. If you can draw the audience's attention, command the audience's attention to the point where they say, we want that guy instead of the guy we cheered and popped for 3 years ago, 4 years ago, that's a hard thing to just nonchalantly write off. It seems to me in the things that I read, that's where the audience is right now with the WWE audience, that they see him not as a part of a six-man or part of a team situation. They see him as an individual ready for the rub and ready for the push. So, I'd be willing to digress to the people that have watched consistently, because again, I don't. And that's not a slap or anything. We've talked about how many times on this podcast, I try, and I just cannot dig my teeth into it. There's nothing that really interests me, or very little, I should say, that interests me there. But the fact that Kofi has been able to commandeer the imagination of the fans through all of that, and again, up and down the card, the nobody spot on the card, the mid card, the lower main event card, the main event card, regardless of where you are on that pantheon, that the fans are still clamoring to see you in a prominent role. So I think that's much more a testament to Kofi's abilities than it is to the writers or to anything we could say about it.
The one thing that kind of irks me about it, just in a sense, just because all these quote unquote, smart fans or these guys that cover wrestling or these wrestlers, they don't realize this little tiny little fact that I know you're very familiar with because you've done it a lot. And I know this used to happen to Bret Hart all the time. And obviously now Daniel Bryan is kind of falling victim of it. Guy is so damn good in the ring. People don't realize, not necessarily he's carrying the guy, but he is so good. He's making the other guy look so good. And the people don't even realize it. They think Kofi's great. I was watching Daniel Bryan and think, wow, Daniel Bryan is just making Kofi look like an even bigger star.
Yeah, completely possible. Again, having not seen it, I really can't say, but I think to me, it's one of those things where the ends justifies the means. In wrestling, where you put two wrestlers in there, because let's face it, it takes two to tango, right? So you could be the greatest wrestler on the planet, but you put somebody out there with a broomstick. We've all heard the proverbial, Ric Flair can make a broomstick look at a star, right? I'd be willing to bet that Ric Flair probably couldn't draw with a broomstick. Just saying, and that's no slap at Rick. That's just a statement of fact. So again, going back to Kofi Kingston, the fact that he's been able to commandeer this kind of reaction, having come from positions on the card that weren't prominent, that tells me that he's capturing at least the imagination of the fans. And that is not an easy thing to do, especially when you're not in a prominent role. I.e., all the writers have written all these great storylines just to focus and throw the showcase on you. That doesn't seem to be the case with Kofi. It seems to me they could potentially have another star on their hands. And as you can see with Daniel Bryan, having something happen, and I despise using the word because I'm so sick of hearing it, but having something happen organically, like the fans just latching on to a particular name or wrestler or talent and clamoring for that, it beckons back to what we saw with Daniel Bryan, and it begs the question, like, why are the fans clamoring for this one person or this one deal? And I don't think wrestling fans just sit back and say, hey, let's clamor for this guy just to be politically correct or whatever. I think it's a genuine desire by the audience to see that particular person in a more prominent role. So if that's the case, then, that'll play out as we watch it in real time. The luxury for Vince is that he has his audience talking about somebody else, anybody else, because, as we're seeing a lot of defections and, a lot of the WWE talent opting not to re-sign their contracts and try their hands with AEW. So, it's again one of those things where you shrug your shoulders and think, for a guy like Kofi, that, hopefully this works out to be his time, because, he's obviously been loyal. He's been there for how long? And, comparing against all the things we've seen and we've talked about in the podcast, it ain't easy to find that person down the card that can commandeer the upper card for their own benefit. It's just not a very likely thing that you see very often.